Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's a beautiful, beautiful day here in Wells, Nevada. And this is February the 23rd, 2019. And we have been reading from our book that's called The Amazing World of Kreskin. And we have moved into the next part of the book, which is called Part 2, The Power of Suggestion. And so we will start reading Power of Suggestion. Suggestion. For my specific purposes of entertainment is the presentation of an idea to an individual or group of individuals. It may or may not have a rationality to it. If it is accepted uncritically. If the person or persons do not respond to it, it is rationally dissolved. I say to a subject, "You're getting cold." Reason would tell him that there is absolutely no rational or physical cause for feeling chill. Yet because of conditioning and uncritical response, he reacts. As my conviction grows, his chill grows. If an additional individual sits with his eyes closed and is convincingly told that a heated $50 is being placed on his forehead, sensors will show that his temperature rises slightly. Yet he knows that no one is sticking a red-hot coin between the eyes. It is but another example how our complete vulnerability to suggestion. These, however, are natural responses. If you become engrossed in a book about the Arctic, if the descriptions of a howling wind and of vast fields of ice and snow are exceptional, you may well react. You may also find that your body temperature has been slightly lowered. By the same token, if someone enters a room saying, "My, it's hot in here," you suddenly become aware of heat that hadn't bothered you a moment before. Suggestion at work. A timeless elementary psychology test is to select one hapless student prior to the next class and have a few selected students tell him he doesn't look too well, or ask him worriedly, "How do you feel, Jack?" Periodic reminders of his state of health, which happens to be superb, brings doubts. Soon he thinks he doesn't feel well. Chain response can be triggered without any verbal prompting. During the 2 world wars, Army and Navy proceeding centers daily reported incidences of fainting on the inoculation lines, 2 or 3 at a time. Strapping men would flop over before the needle was inserted, responding to the suggestive sight of the syringe up to the line. Most humans are defenseless against suggestion in varying degrees. "Looks like you're putting on a little weight," can send people dashing to the scales even though they haven't gained a pound in a year. Is your hair getting thin? Prompts a trip to the mirror. At dinner, one person can ruin an otherwise perfectly good meal by suggesting, "This soup tastes a little bitter, doesn't it? I hope the can was okay." The can was fine, but goodbye, soup. It is simple but baffling suggestion at work. Through auto-suggestion with calm, tranquil imagery, I can lower my pulse rate to 15 or 18 beats a minute against the normal 72. By holding that imaginary, and for myself, by adding a total blue-like quality in a setting of green trees, I can easily maintain this lucid metabolic rate. I don't say to myself, my pulse is going down. I'm relaxing. I feel drowsy. That's the worn pattern of impotent self-hypnosis. As meaningless as reading tea leaves, should anyone desire that input, it should be recognized as a crutch. It's worth no more than that. If I change the imaginary to red and bringing running horses in my pulse beat will rise rapidly. That is autosuggestion in its purest form. For some time, the Russians have been using a similar method to train soldiers to minimize pain. The pain becomes a sensation of pressure or is divided up over different parts of the body. Autosuggestion or self-suggestion is exactly what it implies: an internal communication with and between the mind and any part of the body or the body as a whole. It is believed that we speak to ourselves as infants long before we learn to speak to others. If we are not mentally ill, no day goes by when we don't talk to ourselves, either verbally or mentally. Autosuggestion, then, is a directed, channeled form of internal communication with the mind as central control. It is normal and not paranormal. With what little we have learned of it, and we are learning, autosuggestion is an old-fashioned term already and oversimplified, but no one has been able to come up with a better definition. Perhaps we should say that with it less, we struck with one of those staggering lab connotations. But as a mind source power, it is almost totally unexplored and untapped, capable of masking or elevating pain, reducing tensions without use of drugs, and possibly achieving potentials beyond our present comprehension. The manifestations are not hypnotic. They are completely normal and natural. Conviction is the key. Suggestion has, of course, always been the keystone of hypnosis. But beyond this manufactured sleep state, it is the natural daily persuasion used in every human contact and home in the office, at school, at play, and work, at lovemaking. It is much a part of our lives as yes and no responses. In this book, Our Magic, published in 1911, effects creator Nelvin Mascalini wrote, having induced a marked condition of mental receptivity, we cannot expect our subjects to conceive ideas other than those we create, either directly or by suggestion. Neither a hypnotist nor a clinical psychologist, Mascalini was accurately analyzing techniques of mystifying audiences. At the same time, in a few simple words, he described the foundation for suggestibility. The power of suggestion, or as the Russians now term it, the science of suggestiology, has every indication that it can become a completely normal communication of the future. Even thought in its ESP form, it will be nonverbal and telepathic. Moving beyond the word suggestion, the science of suggestiology or suggestibility in highest refinement is based on the human ability to accept an idea and respond to it almost automatically, whether it is verbal or nonverbal. It is a normal response in most humans. Often, those who are highly individual, creative, and often artistic on responding. They will be totally awake, laughing, talking, normal in every sense. Most people respond easily to suggestion. As a simple homemade experiment, tell a friend very casually, there's a red spot on your arm. Does it itch? First, he'll look for the spot. Then he'll likely answer defensively, you're crazy. There's no spot on my arm. Keep looking down at his arm. Oh, your friend is now apt to be staring at the imaginary spot. He may begin to doubt his own eyes, even though he'll protest you're insane. If you glance away, he may furtively scratch it. If you persist, reminding him of the external surface of his body, of which he is seldom conscious, he may begin to itch all over. A more substantive experiment is to catch someone who is whistling while engrossed in work. Do not attract his attention, but begin whistling another tune very softly. After a moment, increase the volume. Usually he will shift to your tune without being aware he's done so. Later, he'll probably declare, as part of an unconsciousness defense mechanism, that your tune was what he was whistling in the first place. He is a victim of your suggestion. In terms of autosuggestion, become aware of the skin for a few minutes. Think of the possibility that your own arm may or might itch. Perhaps the underpart of the other arm, and the area behind your knee. If you work at it, you can be tingling from head to toe in a minute. You'll have to reprogram yourself by thinking about something else. As another example of suggestions, certain TV or radio commercials are mildly irritating. By calculation on Madison Avenue, they narrow your attention. You may try to ignore them. Can you? Try not to think of the word moonbeam every time you see the word night pop up in the next paragraph. Every time you see night, you will find yourself thinking of the word moonbeam. So you can attempt to ignore the commercial, but then the words simply impress themselves on an unconscious level. Night. Or you can consciously react to the annoyance by making up your or you can consciously react to the annoyance by making up your mind that you don't like the commercial and won't purchase the product. Ironically, the advertiser may be satisfied with your response. Night. They have made some impression on you. Most likely, you'll forget the specific incident on a conscious level. Yet a few days later, when you are shopping, you find yourself confronted with a myriad brands of the product you'd like to purchase. Night. You think to yourself, they're probably all equally good, so I'll grab this one. Chances are extremely high that the brand you pick unthinkingly is the one that agonized you a week earlier. Night. You would have been better off remembering the earlier stimuli. But it hits you in a busy moment, and life is too full of everyday happenings to bother with small things. Night. If you found yourself thinking moonbeam on reading Night, the power of suggestion worked. Even if you fought against it, sternly rejecting the idea that some silly words on the paper would force you to respond, it still worked. To reject it, you had to think of it. Additionally, the unconscious accepted it whether you liked it or not. For me, professionally, suggestion functions with one person, 10 or 200, and there isn't a hypnotic trance, nor a candle flicker of mysticism in the whole house. Using only suggestion, tapping nothing but waiting imagination, I have subjects seeing flying saucers or shining in polar cold within 2 minutes, and audiences of 600 dancing Irish jigs. I doubt that the few who saw the spinning saucers got goosebumps or did the dongong stomp were abnormal, although some might have been super sensitive to suggestion, as pliable as child's clay. They can be lumped with those very fortunate people, if they are any, who have seen the Hindu rope trick. In this, the most splendid form of imagination, the faker supposedly throws a rope into the air, and his assistant climbs to the top and disappears. The faker, knife in teeth, climbs up after him and vanishes. It becomes a full setting. in the beautiful paralysis of a Hindu or great Thurston. Suddenly, parts of the assistant's body begin to fall from the air. A head, a leg, an arm, and the faker climbs back down to pick up the pieces of the body, tossing them into a trunk. He finally closes it, utters some mumbo jumbo, and then opens it. Out hops the smiling assistant. Blackstone did it on the stage in a modified form, and Thurston had his version of it as well. Suggestibility has been a theory in the case of the faker's spell, and enchanting craftsmanship did it for Messing, Blackstone, and Thurston. Magic audiences enter with a dare in their eyes, but quickly succumb to the childlike need within all of us. When a lady is, say, sawed in half, bits of cloth flying through the air, the sound of the blade whirling through the meat and bone, the elements are overwhelmingly suggestive, and the audience has already been conditioned unconsciously by simply relating the two to the word magic. While the majority of the adults know for a fact that no lady is being sliced, they will still wince, and many will close their eyes. Their imagination is so powerful that it cannot be thawed. It has been triggered, and they can almost feel that shining blade as it grinds through the bone. The late Charles Carter, investigating secrets of Oriental sorcery in the early 30s, wrote, "Certain it is that in the hills of Somalia, the atmosphere is extremely rarefied. Deep inhalations of pure oxygen affect the brain and so produce hallucinations, easily influenced by adult operators. Certain also is that hallucination itself is real magic and mystery beyond the wildest dreams of a great Carter or Thurston. It has been claimed that a photographer once snapped the rope trick, positive that he had it at last caught the astounding and legendary feat. However, when the picture was developed, the faker and his assistant were still standing on earth, and the rope was curled around the faker's arm. Nobody was climbing, nothing had happened. It was all in the photographer's imagination. The topper to this story is that no one, to my knowledge, has ever seen that particular photograph nor identified the photographer by name. More than that, the probability of an entire mass of people repeatedly hallucinating day to day, week to week, must be questioned. The rope trick remains a fairy tale, a jack and a beanstalk, at least to me, until proven otherwise. However, imagery born of suggestibility is momentarily as powerful and true in the mind as hemp tied firmly in the air. It isn't even necessary to take a trip to Sonoma or trance of rarefied air. Harvey, a play about a huge imaginary rabbit, was a Broadway hit for years. The rabbit never appeared on stage, but the leading character, first played by Frank Fay, talked with him as if he existed. Some people in the audience became so involved that they forgot they weren't supposed to see Harvey. Their imagination did the rest. They reported that he was asked quite seriously, "Wherever did you get a rabbit that big?" Chapter number 2. With imagination as the key, with the power of suggestion as the tool, I suggest and guide charades, intensifying them to the point where the subject discards his everyday role. The drifting daydream is put on like a cloak. It all becomes real. The mind, being very capable of a daydream, is also capable of going to the moon. It does not require someone with psychic powers to come up on the wavelengths. Not long ago, in a nightclub setting, I suggested the role of moon people to a pair of college students. I did not hypnotize them. I simply got their attention, and after a moment of conditioning, manipulated their imaginations. In a few minutes, they were talking animatedly, and I guided them to discuss how they lived out there or up there. In situations like this, what comes out in the cross talk between two moon people is, of course, gibberish to anyone else. A fascinating phenomenon in itself. One thought acts as interpreter and explains what goes on aboard that poetic satellite. The person imagines that he or she can interpret the gibberish. Sometimes it seems earnest enough to be real. It is pure invention. In other shows, I have often asked the interpreter to inquire of the moon man how many sexes exist on that cherry ball. Invariably and unexplainably, the answer will be 4. I haven't the faintest idea why or what triggers that precise number. Suddenly, in this particular show, I saw the moon person turn to the interpreter and ask a question in gibberish. The other person on the stage began laughing. Then the audience burst into laughter because I had been more interested in audience reaction than what was occurring on the stage at this point. The crowd was ahead of me. Puzzled, I looked at them and in turning back to the subjects, saw the interpreter pointing towards a staircase which was off to the side of the club. He answered in gibberish, dropping his role of interpreter and becoming a concerned friend. The moon inhabitant then left his chair and began to walk towards the staircase. It dawned on me that he'd asked directions to the men's room. The audience quieted down as they saw the subject leave the stage and head for the steps. They looked back at me. I was dumbstruck. It had never happened before. So far as I knew, there was no way to communicate something of this sort in a blee-dee-bee-da-ba-doo-dee-doo-da-boo-boo. Yet, it had been done. It also occurred to me that in going downstairs, the subject might well meet someone who would speak to him in a friendly tone. His possible reply in moon gibberish, boo-blah-boo-gee-boo-boo, could bring about gentle room, bewilderment, even a hard punch in the nose. I ran after him, caught him, and reprogrammed him, letting him proceed to his urgent mission as other than a moon man. The fact that nature sent him toward the WC is entirely explainable because he wasn't in any sleeping trance, nor in a special physical or mental condition, but his ability to communicate his need in satellite language is beyond my knowledge to this date. Unfortunately, given the right circumstances, it will happen again. The type of phenomenon I believe involves straight from psychodrama. If a group of closely knit people play charades for about an hour, suggestibility usually increases to the point that when a scene or idea is projected by the person doing the pandemonium, he or she will function automatically, submerging into the role and expanding it without great thought. I have observed charades that have been close to telepathy, although the players were completely unaware of having crossed over into another form of communication. Chapter 3. One of the masters of suggestibility is author Godfrey. Thought his audience on radio and TV have been in the millions. Godfrey often sounds as if he were talking to a single person. Some of his commercials have been classics. No other entertainer has been as skilled in the use of auto communication. His tapes are an education in salesmanship alone, and I owe much to his techniques and to his personal encouragement. 4 different goals through involving salesmanship too. Evangelist Billy Graham is a master of holding an audience. There is a cadence in his voice, a build toward dramatic peaks, and his appearance is compelling. Had he decided to enter politics instead of evangelism, the possibility of Washington residence would not be remote. I once claimed on the air that Graham was a master hypnotist, using the term in reference to his ability to verbally hold a crowd. A ruffled member of Graham's staff called me to complain. However, Graham himself had years before admitted his acknowledgement of audience control on Art Linkletter's CBS Home Party. Another widely known and skilled practitioner is Bishop Fulton J. Sheen. It is evident that he has been as a thorough understanding of the suggestibility phenomenon. His eyes, the structure of his face, the firm yet soothing quality of his voice, and his expert timing combine to produce a holding effect on audiences, whether live or on TV. In the case of both Billy Graham and Bishop Sheen, their abilities are used for the betterment of mankind. My own techniques are somewhat different, tailored for amusement and directed toward immediate hold on an audience to afford participation. I'm hardly a compelling figure and unfortunately lack Bishop Sheen's hypnotic eyes. I've been told that I look sometimes like Mr. Spock from the planet Vulcan of the TV series Star Trek. I find that flattering. Vulcan sounds as if it might be an interesting place to live on, and such a background would undoubtedly add to mentalizing, but I have to do it the hard verbal or telepathic way. At one point in my concerts, I discussed my beliefs that there is no special state of hypnosis, no need for fabricating a sleep-like trance. I confess that I once not only practiced what I believed to be so-called hypnosis, but ardently fostered the trance concept. I tell the audience that my references to hypnosis, both historically and as I practiced it, are in the framework of the past. This is also why I use quotation marks when dealing with the subject. I then attempt to explain what is known of suggestibility in which no trance is involved, and how we all are extremely prone to it. In this sense, we are imaginatively carried away with the actors and story of a good film involving ourselves in it, losing the fact that it is fabricated on a chemical strip. We grip the seat and feel a surge of adrenaline during the chase in The French Connection. We are lost in it, responding to it, and we're far from hypnotized. In somewhat the same way, I cause individuals to respond to suggestions without the introduction of a trance. At that point, I invite volunteers from the audience for demonstrations of suggestibility. While most hypnotists will invite a dozen or so, hoping to find one or two who will be extra responsive. I've discovered the opposite is warranted. It isn't unusual for me to have 90 people on stage when I only ask for 25 or 30 chairs to be filled. The conditioning has already taken place. In fact, I think that by asking for a large number, I fulfill the apparent encouragement factor of safety in numbers, filling the 30 chairs. I request that the others remain standing rather than send them back to their seats. Contrary to a long-held hypnotist belief, subjects do not have to feel relaxed to respond to suggestions. It doesn't seem readily possible that in a matter of fleeting seconds, a person on stage can cause strangers to forget their names, verbally lock their hands, or clamp their eyeballs shut. I asked a man to step forward. "Are you wide awake?" "Yes," he answered. "Are you in a trance?" "No." Then I paused and changed tone to subtly emphasize something I want to plant. I say, "You know, we can forget things in everyday life quite easily." I pass my hand across the front of his face. He knows there is some significance to what I said, something unusual about the hand gesture, but he doesn't know what it is. The plant succeeds. "Do you go to school?" "No." "Work?" "Yes." "Where do you live?" "Peoria Heights." I pause again for perhaps 3 or 4 seconds and then ask in a meaningful way, spacing the words, "By the way, what is your name?" He cannot remember it. He is keying back to the significant plant. He has been waiting for the question and has obeyed the suggestion. He is not asleep or awake. He is wide awake. In a theater in Pittsburgh, I worked this particular demonstration with an audience volunteer. He stood frowning, perplexed. I turned my back, and the audience saw him reach into his coat pocket for his wallet, hoping to read his name off the credit cards. I turned again quickly. Your hand is locked in that pocket. You can't remove it. The hand was, for a moment, paralyzed by the motor responses. But this gentleman was not in a trance, yet he was responding uncritically to an irrational suggestion. As far as it is possible, I introduced the responsive conditioning by natural references. Prior to setting up the polar atmosphere, I may say, wow, it's chilly in here. I fake a shiver. I'm almost freezing. We've got a problem with the air conditioning tonight, but bear with us. We've called for a technician. A few minutes later, having planted the cold idea, I'll proceed to attack the waiting response of the subjects with hard suggestions that it is indeed freezing. Often, one or two will go to the curtains and gather folds around them. Exactly what prompts response to an obviously irrational suggestion is not known. My own theory, admittedly a guess, is that response is simply a normal extension of the everyday examples coupled with a sudden harnessing of the imagination. The response stops instantly unless the imagination is geared. Once stimulated, it knows few boundaries. Expertly guided suggestion, imagination is a marvelous mental vehicle. Imagination triggered by suggestion is quite capable of controlling physical direction. The simplest test is to have a subject stand in front of me. I tell him to close his eyes and imagine that he is standing at the edge of a high building. Street and traffic are 20 floors below. After a moment, he'll begin to sway normally and naturally. I can then suggest that he fall backwards to me to safety. Invariably, if he is responding imaginatively to the idea that he is inches from the ledge, a sickening plunge beneath him, the suggestion will tilt him back into my arms. Every adult and most children have at one time or another looked down from a great height. It takes very little to freshen that vivid memory if the eyes are closed. This was one of the early versatile suggestibility experiments. However, environmental hazards easily trigger imagination. If a board 5 feet long and 2 feet wide is passed on the floor, a subject will usually walk it without concern, moving confidently, keeping his balance. Place the same board between two buildings and the subject may refuse to walk it. If he does agree, there's a possibility that he'll fall. Yet the physical characteristics of the board have not changed. There has been a change in attitude prompted by an imaginative stimulation. While it is not an absolute rule, it appears that when imagination and the will are in conflict, as demonstrated by the board test, imagination will usually win. I've taken this type of test to a more sophisticated degree on several occasions. On a Johnny Carson show, I marked a card within a deck of cards and then handed the pack to another guest, asking TV personality Virginia Graham to please stand and close her eyes. A staff member stood behind her. As I proceeded to call up the cards, and when the marked card was reached, Mrs. Graham toppled on mental order. She was not aware at the moment why she had fallen backwards. Suggestion has been mentally implanted. The demonstration is on MVC tape for those who are skeptical. Dr. Vasilin conducted similar experiments. I once walked up to a standing subject and requested that he stiffen his leg. Moving away, I told him that he could not bend it. He lumbered and limped all over the stage. I released him, and he immediately said, "Now I can bend it." I nodded. "That's very true, but the condition has been transferred to your left leg." He took a step forward and found that one was rigid. Playing a date on the Italian cruise ship Victoria on a voyage to the Caribbean, I made one subject take off her shoes and then replace them on the opposite feet. I requested her to stand up and walk. "Are you certain you have your shoes on the right way?" "Yes, I'm certain." "Do they feel all right?" "They feel fine." All the while, she was practically falling down. Suggestibility rips through inhibitions and occasionally makes me wonder if all of us do not have parrot-like abilities that we suppress. Photographic and auto impressions that are stored in our memory banks, never brought to life until the charade is stimulated. One night at the Embers, I questioned a subject about his TV watching habits. He said that he always watched Gunsmoke. I replied, "In a few minutes you'll be Chester." Soon he was walking through the audience calling for Mr. Dillon. In the distinctive accent of Dennis Weaver, he even walked like Weaver. He apparently was enjoying the brief period as Matt Dillon's deputy because he stopped at several tables to sign autographs. I examined them later. They were signed Chester. The ability to not only take on characterizations but create it constantly surfaces. In at least one phase of all my concerts, I attempt to bring our creativity. At Kurztown State Teachers College in Pennsylvania last fall, I told a student that within a few minutes he would rise from his chair and request my microphone because a very important cause was on his mind. He wanted to raise funds to feed the starving bloodhounds of Upper Shrinkaka in the White Hills of Russia. He listened intently while I explained that they lived on a diet of Limburger cheese and Chanel No. 5. I impressed upon him that it was terribly serious mission. The audience awaited his readiness to make the speech while I went on with another routine. About 4 minutes later, he arose and took my mic. No one laughed. I think the audience wondered if a person could seriously sustain what was a ludicrous subject and carry it off without self-consciousness. A seasoned performer, a comedian, could do it. This subject was a student, but very often inhibitions and self-consciousness are lost in the group setting. The student had been part of the large group on stage, identifying with them and fortifying from them, knowing what the auditorium reaction would eventually be. I had instructed him to stamp his foot if the audience did annoy him. He began to make the speech. his face deadly serious, his voice carrying earnest conviction. It was utterly ridiculous as well as hilarious. The audience began to laugh. He stamped his foot and they roared. In the spring, I've done the same routine while entertaining a dentist's convention. My subject, a young man, pleaded emotionally for the dogs, exposing what have been a personal issue. That dentist were making huge sums of money nowadays and could well afford to share some of the dogs of Upper Sharinka. He borrowed a hat and began going through the audience, which was now in stitches. Deep conviction at work, sprung by suggestibility, is rather awesome to witness, sometimes provoking, disturbing reflections. At St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, I told a group of about 88 football players that the dean of students, a man named Kirkpatrick, would enter the auditorium and come up on stage, but that this Kirkpatrick was really an imposter and should not be allowed to remain inside. About 5 minutes later, the real Dean Kirkpatrick came down the aisle, and although they knew him well, they forcibly removed him. It was well below zero outside, and he entered a second time. The subject's headed for him again. I ended it. Visual response is but another phase of the suggestibility phenomenon. On occasion, I'll carry what looks like a dozen pairs of eyeglasses on stage, and in setting up the demonstration, point out that these particular glasses will cause great distortion so that the subjects will see one another as though looking into funhouse mirrors at the carnivals. After I place the glasses on their foreheads, asking them please not to touch them, the subjects look at one another and begin to break up. It is interesting to observe how they handle this suggestion. Some claim the others have the heads of giraffes, eyes like headlights, or noses like bananas. They are remembering what they have seen in similar true distortions. On complementing the test, I stick a finger through the frame, showing both the subjects and the audience that there are no lenses. Another version of sight response is to hand two subjects seated closely a single magazine, usually an issue of the pictorial type. I tell one subject that the pictures on the left-hand page are sad or poignant, and that the ones on the right-hand page are very funny. The other subject is given opposite instructions. The contrast as each studies the same page is startling. At Lycoming College in Willport, Pennsylvania, the test ended in an argument between the two readers, the more aggressive one ripping a page out. Sound response to suggestibility is equally interesting. If a piano happens to be on stage, I often tell the subjects that I will play something by Chopin, perhaps the Interlude Opus number 10, number 3, the theme song from The Field of the Magnificent Obsession, which I happen to like, but that as they hear it, they will react with disgust. The rendition will be off key, full of discords. However, if I play chopsticks, it will sound classic, rendered beautifully. I begin to play Chopin Joplin causes some subjects to place their hands over their ears, others to groan. One girl, probably a classic lover, actually lowered the piano lid on my fingers when I sieged into chopsticks. The subjects sit back enthralled. Of all the scenes, taste and smell are the easiest to distort. I don't do it often for obvious reasons, but have handed an onion to a subject with his eyes closed, telling him that it is an apple. Good apple, huh? Great. The discovery is not so great. This test, however, will not work or has not worked for me. If the subject has visual register coupled with a violent dislike of raw onions, response cannot be forced against the knowing will. Sometimes I end the suggestibility portion of the concert by telling the group on stage that the one particular chair will burst into flames on signal. At a Knights of Columbus benefit in Union, New Jersey, a man dashed backstage for a fire extinguisher. At another concert, a lady grabbed a pitcher of water off a table and tossed it, splashing the front row of dousing some expensive furs. I safeguard it now by ending the phase in another manner if water is available on stage. And the next chapter is chapter 4, and we will do chapter 4 on Tuesday. So I'll look forward to coming back on Tuesday and doing some more reading of this amazing world of Kreskin. I hope you also will enjoy the readings and hope to see you in the near future. And I thank all of you that come to see and listen to the readings. And I look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you very much. And everybody have a fantastic and great day. Thank you.